Beware the stare of Mary Beth, who cannot even rest in death. She walks these halls when night is deep, and those she catches, she will keep. Ophelia was startled awake and looked up at the ceiling so high above. Just a dream, she murmured, then closed her eyes again for a moment before she reached over for her phone and glanced at the screen. 6:15. A groan escaped Ophelia's mouth. Well, it wasn't like she had to keep to a schedule, she told herself, then sat up in bed and started stretching her arms and legs. This big house she had bought needed to be ready by the end of summer, and if she got a head start, well, all the better. She swung her legs out of the bed, but made sure not to touch the circle of red dust on the floor surrounding her. The first rays of sunlight were slowly creeping into the room through the half-drawn curtains. Night had already passed. "It's okay," she said out loud, to no one in particular, but watched her surroundings closely nonetheless. Nothing moved. She waited another few seconds before putting her other foot down, then grabbed her phone again and stepped out of the circle. The moment she did so, a certain smell seemed to fill the air. Lavender soap and tobacco. "At least I'm serving a fortunate coffee," Ophelia whispered with a sad smile on her face. There was nothing like the fear of death to get one started in the morning. She walked out of the room that had once been the administrative office, then headed down the hallway with 6 rooms, 3 on each side. Right by the stairs was the old dumbwaiter, a small freight elevator to carry food up from the kitchen. One had to operate it by hand. Ophelia smiled as she saw it, still waiting there, still fully operational, even though the last time it had been used for its intended purposes had to be almost 100 years back. She had dug up everything about this house before she had decided to buy it, and all those little details still filled her heart with joy. It had once been an old rich man's mansion, but after the guy had died, people had transformed it into an orphanage and renamed it Mother Mercy's House for Abandoned Youths, which the locals still called it. Well, they had shortened the name to Mother Mary's, in honor of the woman who had gone through so much trouble to help children in need at the start of the 20th century. Ophelia turned away from the dumbwaiter and toward the stairs that now almost glimmered in the first ray of sunlight of the day. She had gone through quite a bit as well, she told herself. Everything from buying this place to even getting people to step foot in it had been a chore. No one around these parts had wanted to help her at first. People had told her that she had made a big mistake purchasing this place, that there was a reason why this building had been closed down at around the time of the Second World War and never opened again. But she had ignored them. In the end, Ophelia had contacted companies further and further away to help her fix this place up. And they had done a marvelous job, she thought, as her hand touched the railing of the stairs leading down and slowly stroked the old wood. To her, and the expert she had called in's surprise, the whole structure had still been solid, even after almost 80 years of neglect. The foundation was great, as far as they could tell. The walls from the basement up to the attic were still holding up reasonably well, and one of the guys she'd gotten in had even told her that he knew buildings not even a third the age that were in far worse condition. Most of the interior, including the ornaments, the floors, and even some of the furniture, was still usable as well. She probably could have paid off quite a large chunk of the repair costs if she had sold them. Ophelia knew. But she didn't want to tarnish this place with new or cheap furniture. Every single piece she could still use, she would. If she wanted to make it into a successful hotel one day, those things would probably pay for themselves in advertisement alone. Ophelia slowly passed the half landing of the stairs and looked down onto the first floor. It was darker there, but she felt no fear. The night was over already, she told herself again. No chance Mary Beth would turn up now. She shivered, even though she tried not to let it show. Because that was the name of her main problem right now. When this building had been an orphanage, many older women had found work here. Some stayed for years, others for months. But one name had popped up in almost any old newspaper clipping she had found. Mary Beth. Formerly Sister Mary Beth. Ophelia had spent weeks and quite a bit of money digging up everything there was to know about that person, and the information she had gotten painted a grim picture. A former nun, she had abandoned the convent and worked in quite a few places around these parts. Sometimes as a nanny, but she had been fired from those jobs within weeks or months, and then even from an administrative position at a brothel close by. Administrative here being a code word for not a girl of the house, but rather something akin to a madam or even a bouncer. Mary Beth seemed to have taken a liking to that kind of work. At least until one day she got fired and disappeared for a few weeks. The timing coincided with a giant brawl in the brothel, where 2 guys and a girl got hospitalized, and the place got raided by the authorities. It wouldn't surprise anyone if Mary Beth had not just been involved, but started the thing. Her physical appearance, at least according to the newspapers of the time, was pretty much frightening by their standards back then. Bigger than most men, able to carry a dead pig or passed out John through the town. 4 teeth are missing, and she has patchy, greasy hair and hands big enough to hold a skull in them. Those were the exact words some journalist had used to describe her, and Ophelia had almost felt offended on Mary Beth's behalf as she had read them. At least, until she had read the reports of some of the children she had found upstairs. The woman had turned up at the doorstep of the orphanage one evening, and the administrator back then had reluctantly given her a job. She had been tasked with keeping the peace around the house at night, and Ophelia was sure the woman must have absolutely loved that kind of work. It would have been right in her wheelhouse. Then again, employing her here was probably the worst thing the owner could have done for the kids living in this place. They must have felt it the first time their eyes had looked up at the strange woman walking the halls at night. Well, most of what Ophelia could find out about their thoughts about it came from either scribbled notes that had been confiscated or statements in the monthly reports she had found upstairs. There had been problems. A whole lot of them, and pretty much right from the beginning. Not even a week after she had started walking those halls, she caught a young boy outside his room in the middle of the night. And according to the reports, the child turned up at roll call the next day, black and blue. A girl was caught by her talking with one of her roommates during the night, and Mary Beth made him scream loud enough to wake up the rest of the house. Some of the older kids banded together and walked into the administrator's office not even a month after Mary Beth had started there to try and get her fired again. But it was of no use. Because even though she was horrible to the children, her appearance had helped the orphanage in another way. There had been quite a few kids who had gone missing from this place over the years, but once Mary Beth had started her work, it had almost dropped to zero. It didn't matter if they were runaways or if anyone tried to come in and kidnap one of those children. They were all caught by her and either dragged back into the house or beaten half to death and dumped in front of the giant metal gate. And yeah, as brutal as Mary Beth was to the kids, she seemed to have at least a bit of restraint with them. Not so much with the 3 guys who had tried to enter the premises at night a week after she had started working there. She pretty much tore them apart as far as Ophelia could find out, and just left them lying out there by the road in a pool of their own blood. So, the administrator made the choice to make the kids' lives harder in exchange for heightened security. Ophelia was sure the kids didn't see it that way at all. For them, it must have felt like a fresh hell. Whoever was caught outside of bed at night got beaten and dragged back. At least at first. But the children seemed to slowly grow accustomed to Mary Beth's presence. They still grumbled, but they never marched into the administrator's office again. That was also when some of the kids started making poems or songs about her. They used to sing them in their rooms, loud enough for her to hear, but fell silent at the stroke of 9 when Mary Beth began her rounds. Some of the words still remain to this day, and Ophelia had thought about framing the texts on their old and weathered sheets of paper to hang on the walls. All but one. The one that had replaced all others almost a decade later. Because that one, she had heard herself. In her dreams, and even when awake. Ophelia shivered as she reached the first floor and looked over at the door leading down into the basement. She turned and walked past it, toward the kitchen, which was one of the few modern things in this old and storied house. It hadn't been easy or cheap putting it in, but in the end, it would be worth it. As soon as the place was finished up and the last few rooms were clean and comfy, she would start looking for a chef. Well, and once the other problem was finally taken care of. Ophelia got herself a glass of water and walked toward the dining room, but not before smiling at the old dumbwaiter's door right by the entrance of the kitchen. It ran from the upper floor down into the basement. Useful for food, but also bedding that used to be washed the floor below. Maybe she could do something with it as well. The guests would probably love seeing this thing in action, right? Ophelia stepped over the threshold and into the dining room and felt another shiver running through her bones. All the tables but one had been pushed to the walls, together with all the chairs but 2. She could hardly get used to the sight still, especially after what she had seen these past few days. One table and 2 chairs right in the center of the room, encircled by a ring of red dust. Ophelia swallowed hard and continued heading toward it. It was probably the safest spot in the house, she told herself, yet felt trepidation as soon as her foot crossed over the line. She had sat here a week ago with Annabelle, a medium she had found that had come highly recommended. They had held a séance, and that was how she had gotten to know this place and its residents more intimately. At first, before 9 o'clock, 2 boys and 1 girl, all around 12 years old, were all still stuck here. Then, after the clock had struck 9, they had disappeared, and in their stead, Ophelia had heard the voice of Mary Beth reciting this dreadful poem. Beware the stare of Mary Beth, who cannot even rest in death. She walks these halls when night is deep, and those she catches, she will keep. The medium had told her to stay quiet and calm as they had both listened and then heard these footfalls throughout the house. They had kept sitting in this spot the whole night through, while around them the shadows had seemed to move. Ophelia still felt the same dread as she sat down now, with the old pocket watch in the center of the table, and looked around. This time, at least, she couldn't see a shadow walking past, and didn't have to listen to this poem again and again and again. And as long as she was inside her bed at 9 o'clock, she wouldn't have to spend another night down here either. As long as it was day, this was her place. And as soon as she managed to get rid of this evil presence here, it would turn hers during the night as well. Ophelia took a sip of water and then stared up at the ceiling. The medium, Annabelle, had taught her quite a bit about such spirits. What she needed was to clean out whatever kept Mary Beth here, but for that, she needed more information. She already knew when the woman had died, around a decade after starting here and slowly moving up the proverbial food chain, including getting her own punishment room down in the basement. She had tumbled down the stairs. Ophelia was sure her death wasn't an accident. But so what? Someone had pushed her down, and she had broken her neck, according to a newspaper article she had found. The problem was that she never left. There wasn't even anything to go on about her body or final resting place. After abandoning a convent, she probably hadn't been allowed in the cemetery of the town. So where was her body? Somewhere around here? Maybe they buried her on the grounds. It was possible. But if they hadn't marked her grave. At least not in a way Ophelia could find. She had gathered all of Mary Beth's worldly possessions she could find. The watch, a nightgown, and her favorite rod. But none of them were enough to bind the soul, Annabelle had told her. But they were enough to get her attention. Which was why she had caught the spirit's gaze. She took another sip and looked around the room. After 8 years of walking those halls, Mary Beth had finally gotten her biggest wish. Her own room, in a place where she could educate the disobedient children, down in the basement, But Ophelia had looked and had found no trace of anything like that. The cellar was clean, wide open, and completely devoid of any kind of what she would call torture instruments. Had someone thrown the stuff out? Well, again, it was possible, but highly unlikely. The child spirits Annabelle and she had talked to had told her about a room with chains and even cages. One where Mary Beth had reigned, and continued to, even during the day. But it wasn't in the basement or the attic, nor anywhere else she could find. There was no shed outside the main building, no other doors or hidden passages she had been able to find. Ophelia groaned and drank the rest of the water. She needed more information. Knowledge is power, right? The only problem now was how to get that information. Her well was pretty much running dry. There were no new documents, no newspapers she hadn't looked at. Even the people she had hired to dig into Mary Beth's life wouldn't find anything new. Ophelia's eyes wandered over the table. There was a small leather pouch bound on top of it, together with a piece of paper. Only one thing left, she murmured, and felt her mood turning sour. The bag held that strange red dust that had protected them during the night. The piece of paper contained a list of things that could banish those spirits once they found the object or thing that bound them. The most immediately doable way being to burn them. Ophelia shivered, then grabbed her own bag that was still on the other chair and pulled out the box of matches and the small can of lighter fluid. Today, she wouldn't take care of another one of the rooms, she promised herself. No. Today was the day Mary Beth would finally disappear from this world. Ophelia got up with her bag slung across her shoulder, put a small leather pouch and the paper into it as well, and started walking through the house. 4:15 in the afternoon. Ophelia could hardly believe her eyes. She had put the bag down by the door of the room and was now lying on the floor, still out of breath, and now completely disheveled as well. Dust was sticking to her skin, her hair was a mess, and her fingertips felt raw. What was she doing here? What the fuck? She hissed breathlessly. There was no sign of anything belonging to that damned woman. Neither in the office she used as a bedroom nor here in any of those rooms. She had even spent 2 hours walking around the dusty attic and had come up with nothing. Ophelia wanted to scream in frustration. Up there in the attic, she had found box after box of documents and sheets of paper scrawled on by children, who had, in all likelihood, long since perished. But that dreadful woman was still here, still bound to this place. She felt another shiver and looked over at the one box she had brought down with her. It was full of those children's drawings. Some were nice, talking about them and their friends, sitting by this one old tree outside that was still there, while others were more disturbing. One girl named Alice had drawn a picture of what could only be described as a monster, but one Ophelia had recognized immediately. In one hand it held what looked like a lantern, in the other a rod. It was Mary Beth, she was sure, but the drawing itself hadn't given off any kind of vibe to her, and the medium had told her that she had to look out for that. Groaning, she sat up and stared out of the window. The sun was still high in the sky, but it had long since passed its zenith. She needed help, but not of the living. A cold breeze seemed to hit her in the face as she formulated those thoughts before Ophelia wiped the dust off her sleeves and then trudged over to the box in her bag. Annabelle had told her a few other things as well. She might be able to talk to some of the former inhabitants on her own. Heading downstairs, she still tried to get the dust and cobwebs out of her hair and clothing. But her main focus was already on something else. That medium had told her to be extra careful if she wanted to talk to spirits on her own. There was a reason normal people absolutely shouldn't do it without professional help. The dangers were numerous, and even if she managed to get information out of the spirits, verifying it would be almost impossible. Besides, if she fucked up and drew Mary Beth's attention again, there was no way of knowing what that thing would do. She quickly descended the stairs and headed toward the dining room. You have 4 hours, Ophelia told herself to calm down her own nerves. That should be enough time, right? She hurried through the kitchen with the box in her hands and felt another chill as the smell of lavender soap and tobacco hit her nose. Mary Beth was close. Ophelia looked around, but the room was still brightly lit. There was no sign of anything being hers. At least nothing she could see or feel. But that stench didn't abate. She could smell it clearly here, at the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room. Ophelia shook her head and hurried toward the table standing in a circle of red dust. Whatever she did, she would be safe here, she thought, as her feet crossed over the red line and the strange smell stayed back. Don't be afraid, Ophelia reminded herself. Don't be hasty, don't get aggressive, and whatever you do, don't invite anything into the circle. You can't know what's really hiding out there. Those had been the words of Annabelle, and she intended to follow them to the letter. Putting the box onto the table, Ophelia sat down and let her bag fall to the floor. She took out a whole bunch of drawings, set them in front of herself, then closed her eyes and mumbled some words the medium had taught her. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. A sudden cold breeze brushed past her. Please, talk to me, she whispered, then opened her eyes and could see that the dining room seemed far darker than only a moment before. There were shadows here now as well. Ones she knew shouldn't be here. How many kids had died in this place? Were all of them victims of Mary Beth? Slowly, they seemed to take form, and Ophelia could see their eyes, filled with fear and sadness. Where is she? The one who took you? The forms around her flickered softly as the children started pointing toward the floor one by one. The basement? She asked, and the spirits around her slowly nodded. No, she had looked down there already, and not just once. Ophelia had searched every inch of that place. But she's not there. Please, help me. I can't find her. One of the ghosts, a boy, suddenly raised his head and stared directly at her. There was terror in his eyes, and a big scar right across the face. Ophelia felt it. The pain and fear this child had experienced in its last moments were still echoing around this place. His hand got raised as well, and the finger pointed straight at her. A cold chill gripped her heart as she saw it, and realized all the others were now staring at her as well, lifting their hands one by one. They weren't pointing at her, she thought. No, their fingers were aiming at something in her back. Ophelia whipped her head around to look behind her and could see a single girl standing in front of the threshold to the kitchen. Even in the darkness, she could see blood in the child's hair and a head wound on her scalp. Her arm was raised as well, but pointing off to the side. "The kitchen?" Ophelia asked, then shook her head immediately. "No, it's the dumbwaiter." The little girl nodded, and Ophelia felt another chill. "Thank you, all of you, so much," she blurted out and jumped up from the chair. She wanted to immediately run toward the kitchen, but the shapes around her hadn't disappeared. Ophelia closed her eyes, mumbled the words to stop the seance, then opened them again, and found herself standing there alone. She finally knew where Mary Beth was hiding. Grabbing her bag, she raced through the dining room and toward the kitchen. This would be the last time, she told herself. After that, she wouldn't ever have to deal with ghosts or spirits or the like again. She slid around the corner toward the dumbwaiter, grabbed hold of the small, almost hidden hatch to its shaft, and opened it. The odor of lavender soap and tobacco flooded the kitchen. She was close, somewhere down there. Ophelia looked around once more, then pushed her bag into the waiting dumbwaiter and started to climb in after it. It was a dumb idea, she knew, but time was of the essence now. If she didn't hurry, and the clock struck 9 while she was in there, she'd never get out again. She heard the rope that held the elevator up straining under her weight as she climbed inside and pulled out her phone to light the way. This place was tight. Hardly big enough for her to fit, but at least she had finally found a way to solve her problems once and for all. Ophelia reached out to the rope to slowly lower herself down and heard the unmistakable sound of wood bending, then the fibers inside the rope tearing. A scream escaped her mouth as she suddenly felt it giving way and the whole contraption falling down. She could hear her own voice echoing back as the dumbwaiter rushed downward, and Ophelia braced herself a second before a loud impact. Wood splintered beneath her, but it wasn't the floor of the elevator. Someone had put in boards in the basement to stop the dumbwaiter there, but her weight, coupled with the speed of the contraption, broke through without a hitch. The smell of tobacco got stronger as she felt herself falling even further into absolute darkness. Ophelia watched the light of her phone flicker, then felt a second impact as the elevator crashed into stone. The force was enough to eject her out of the dumbwaiter, and with a scream, she fell onto a floor that was far rougher and colder than any of the ones in the rest of the building. Ophelia groaned as she slowly rose up and looked around. The light of her phone was off to her side, illuminating the ceiling above, made of big slabs of stone. Someone had built this place long after the other parts of the house, she realized. A second basement, which had been closed off at some point. Probably when Mary Beth had died. Ophelia grabbed the phone and turned it to take a look at her surroundings. The moment her light hit the wall, she felt her body freeze up. Chains were hanging along the stones, fastened by big metal rings. She could smell it as well, beneath the stench of lavender soap and tobacco. She could identify the odors of rot and blood. "Beware the stare of Mary Beth," Ophelia heard a voice whisper in the darkness. She fumbled around for her bag, but couldn't find it. "Who cannot even rest in death," the voice repeated. The light of her phone flickered. But it wasn't 9 o'clock. She shouldn't be active. Ophelia could see it, right at the border between the light and darkness. Shivering forms looking like people. Dozens of them standing there. Children. Her foot touched something, and Ophelia stumbled and fell. Dust rose into the air, which made the flickering of her light look even worse. "She walks these halls when night is deep," the low, ominous voice repeated, and Ophelia quickly reached out to the things she had tripped over, her bag, and pulled it toward her chest. The room around her had fallen silent again, but now she felt like she could hear them, breathing and sobbing, whispering and crying. Her hand plunged into the bag as she scooted backward, away from the voice. This was her domain, her place. She was active here all the time, a part of her wound. And she had stumbled into this room completely unprepared. The light of her phone flickered one last time before she heard a hissing sound coming from the device, and the whole place got plunged back into darkness. "And those she catches," the voice cackled right by her side. Ophelia screamed as she jumped back and hit the wall. The pouch in her hand got ripped open as she turned it and tried to draw a circle around herself in the darkness. "She will keep." Ophelia pressed her back against the cold stone. She couldn't see anything but heard the labored breath so close by her ear. She was still waiting for the spirit to touch her, to grab her, and drag her through the room. But nothing was happening. Instead, she heard a growl, then another cackle. Ophelia closed her eyes and prayed. What should she do? Even if she had found this place, now she was caught down here. Ophelia opened her eyes and looked around. The darkness wasn't letting up. Her phone was dead and out of reach. She could feel her heart racing out of control. And all the while, right next to her, someone was breathing and chuckling. Her hand plunged into her bag as she felt around for anything that could help her. Ophelia felt a lump in her throat as she pulled out the box of matches. No other choice, she thought, then opened it and quickly ripped one of them against the side of the box. The flame felt far too bright in front of her eyes. Ophelia shrunk back and extended the hand with the lit match away from her body. Something cold touched her wrist as a chuckle filled the air. Terrified, she looked down and could see her hand reaching over the circle of red dust she had poured out in her panic. She tried to pull her arm in again, but felt it stuck. Ophelia raised her eyes as her mouth mumbled the words she had heard from Annabelle. Once to make them visible. She could hear her own voice breaking as the darkness around her seemed to shift and then grow weaker. Someone was standing by her side. a monstrous figure. One big hand was clasped around her wrist as the grim-looking woman stared down at her.
She catches.
The big apparition hissed with unmistakable glee in her voice.
She will keep.
Ophelia screamed as the big hand ripped her from her feet and out of the circle. She could hear children crying, and now could see them as well. The whole room was full of them, all standing by the walls, their faces masks of terror and pain, as the big woman dragged her across the floor. She was screaming and crying, but Mary Beth didn't even seem to notice. Her big hand kept Ophelia's wrist in an iron grip, while she uselessly struggled against it. There had to be something she could do. Mary Beth was dragging her through the room, past the ghostly children still caught there. Why had she come here? She could see the terror in their eyes, many of them shaking as the giant woman passed them by. The thing that bound Mary Beth. It had to be here. Ophelia looked around and could see it. A boy and a girl standing by the wall. Their eyes were averted, but their hands pointed towards something on the floor. In the weak glimmer, Ophelia could hardly see it, but she definitely felt a rush as soon as her eyes fell upon it. Bones on the floor, not far from where the woman was dragging her. Ophelia looked up and could see Mary Beth staring back at her with a manic grin. She would kill her. Everything in her screamed. There was only one chance. Ophelia plunged her hand into the bag and found the small can of lighter fluid. She didn't have time to think about it, bit the plastic cap with her teeth and ripped it open. Mary Beth was still chuckling. The wall was coming closer, and next to it, she could see a table with old dark instruments upon it. Rods and whips. She had been a sadist all her life, and in death, she would have gotten worse, Annabelle had once told her. Ophelia screamed again as she threw the open can with fluid toward the bones that seemed far too large compared to the child-sized ghost standing next to them. Mary Beth yanked her forward, and Ophelia lost her balance. The hand around her wrist disappeared and suddenly grabbed her by the neck. She could feel a shooting pain down her spine as the giant woman pushed and pulled at her. How many children had died in her care? Ophelia grabbed hold of the box of matches as a howling laugh filled the air. She was enjoying this, throwing her around like a doll. Pain shot through her as she felt the discs of her spine scraping against each other. Then suddenly, the floor disappeared beneath her feet as she got lifted into the air. Cold, dead eyes were staring at her. Ophelia screamed as her fingers flicked the match against the side of the box again, and a flame shot up into the air. The giant woman's gaze shifted from her eyes to her hand. Ophelia let go of the lit match and heard the big brute scream. Fire shot up to the ceiling as the puddle of lighter fluid ignited. And suddenly, Ophelia felt herself dropping down to the floor. More screams filled the air as her legs hit the stone below. She rolled back, crawling on hands and feet as the heat pushed away that coldness, and the smell of burning petrol extinguished the odor of lavender soap. Ophelia pulled herself away as the giant spirit screamed in pain and horror. She could hear it. The children. They were shouting as well, but not in pain. 100 voices joined each other as they cried out for Mary Beth to die. This was it, Ophelia thought, as she reached a wall on the other side of the room and turned. Mary Beth was burning, and the children were crowding around her. It was celebrating. Hopefully, they would all soon disappear. She could still feel that pain in her neck as she slumped back against the wall. Soon, she would have to climb up the shaft to get to the normal basement. But not now. No. For now, all she wanted to do was watch the ghosts celebrate as the giant woman burned in the flames.